Ladies and gentlemen, what we are witnessing is not merely a man showing signs of erratic behavior. What we are seeing is the visible unraveling of a narrative, one that has dominated not only the media, but the minds of millions. The myth that one person can hold the weight of an empire built on inequality, division, and financial exploitation. The signs are there, the breakdown, the contradictions, the confusion. But this is not just about him. No, this is about the system that created him. A system that celebrates spectacle over substance, power over principle, and profit over people. You see, when an economy concentrates wealth in the hands of a few, it inevitably breeds desperation among the many. And in that desperation, some people seek salvation in a strongman, a figure who promises to make things great again. But promises built on nostalgia and fear are not solutions. They are symptoms of a system in decline. When we observe him unraveling, publicly, emotionally, politically, we must ask, what does it say about the system that elevated him? This isn't just about politics. It's about the economic system that trains us to idolize billionaires, ignore inequality, and accept that mental and moral decay are the costs of staying on top. Here's the truth: the capitalist model, when left unchecked, demands endless growth, and it consumes everything in its path to achieve it. It consumes resources, relationships, and even reason itself. What we are witnessing is not just the unraveling of a man, but the breaking point of a system. But here's the motivation I want you to walk away with: you are not powerless. You are not merely an observer of decline. You are a participant in history. Every time you choose to learn, to question, to organize, you chip away at the very foundation of inequality. You replace spectacle with substance. You trade fear for education. And most importantly, you plant the seeds for an economy based not on exploitation, but on solidarity and sustainability. Let the unraveling of one man be the catalyst for the awakening of many. Because when systems collapse, communities rise. And when people educate themselves, they empower generations. In an age dominated by mass media and political spectacle, one of the most urgent needs in society is not more commentary, but more education. Deep, economic education that empowers people to understand the roots of the crises they are experiencing. When political figures behave erratically, when systems seem to break down, when polarization takes over discourse, people often default to outrage or apathy. But neither of those responses changes the system. What changes a system, what challenges it at its foundation, is knowledge. Not surface-level knowledge, but structural, economic understanding of how the system operates, whom it benefits, and why it continues in its current form despite widespread suffering. Spectacle dominates our screens. Politicians yelling, headlines screaming, clips going viral. These dominate the public's attention. But beneath that surface is a much more complex reality, one that rarely makes it into mainstream discussion. The average citizen is encouraged to engage emotionally, not intellectually. They are pushed to respond with cheers or jeers, not with critical questions. And the more emotionally reactive a population becomes, the easier it is for the status quo to remain untouched. The system, especially one as entrenched as modern capitalism, thrives on distraction. It prefers an audience, not a citizenry. What's needed is not another viral soundbite, but a structural analysis that connects political chaos to economic instability. Why are people so divided? Why are leaders increasingly erratic? Why does inequality grow year after year despite economic growth on paper? These are not questions that can be answered in a headline or a tweet. They require historical context, economic understanding, and the ability to think beyond individual leaders and political parties. Most importantly, They require people to stop consuming politics like entertainment and start engaging with it as education. When citizens are educated, not merely informed, but truly educated in economics, history, and systems theory, they are far harder to manipulate. They can see through the performances. They can connect policies to outcomes. They understand that inflation isn't just bad luck and that employment isn't a moral failure. They grasp that tax breaks for the wealthy and austerity for the poor are not economic necessities, but political choices made within a capitalist framework that prioritizes profit over people. An educated population understands that healthcare, housing, and education are not privileges but public goods, and they begin to organize around that vision. This is why the ruling elite across many societies often fears deep economic education. Because once people learn how the system works, once they see the levers of power and the mechanisms of inequality, they begin to demand something better. They begin to reject the narrative that there's no alternative. They stop idolizing billionaires. They stop voting against their own interests. They build communities of solidarity instead of fighting over scraps. In short, they become a threat. Not in the violent sense, but in the transformational sense, they become agents of change. Educational empowerment does not mean attending elite universities or reading advanced textbooks. It means creating spaces where real conversations can happen. It means learning the history of labor struggles, understanding how markets function, questioning who controls the resources and why. It means looking at leaders not as saviors or villains, but as products of a system that rewards certain behaviors and punishes others. It means asking why mental health crises are rising, why the middle class is shrinking, why young people are losing hope, and then looking at the structure, not just the symptoms. The focus must shift from personalities to policies, from individual stories to collective conditions. This requires patience, discipline, and a willingness to unlearn what many have been taught through years of media conditioning. But the payoff is enormous. Once a population begins to understand, really understand how the system operates, they begin to imagine alternatives. And once alternatives are imagined, movements begin. And once movements change becomes not just possible, it becomes inevitable. So let us not waste our energy on political spectacle. Let us not be consumed by the emotional drama of one leader's downfall. Let us use that moment as a portal, a doorway into a deeper understanding of the system itself. Education, not outrage, is what will move us forward. Knowledge, not noise, is what will empower us to create a fairer, saner, more sustainable world. And that begins not with watching more, but with learning more. The visible mental collapse of a powerful political figure is more than an isolated psychological episode. It is a reflection of broader and deeper economic and social disintegration. When individuals in positions of extreme influence begin to act irrationally, incoherently, or destructively, it often indicates more than personal instability. It is a mirror held up to a society and a system that are themselves cracking under pressure. The image of a leader losing their composure, confidence, or coherence can be emotionally charged, even entertaining to some, late, but the truly in question is, why is it happening? And what does it reveal about the structure that made their rise possible in the first place? In advanced capitalist societies, where power and wealth are highly concentrated, individuals often become symbols of the broader system's health or sickness. When a leader begins to publicly unravel, it often signals the stresses being experienced by the system they represent. Consider the enormous expectations placed on public figures in late-stage capitalist economies to maintain the illusion of control, to distract from rising inequality, to sell hope in the face of economic despair. These are not small demands, and they take a toll, not only on the person but on the credibility of the entire apparatus behind them. The leader's instability becomes a symptom of the failing promises of economic and political stability that many people were taught to believe in. The spectacle of a political figure's breakdown can distract from this reality, but it should be viewed as a signal, an educational moment, to interrogate the deeper failures that underlie the performance. The collapse of logic, empathy, and accountability at the top is not spontaneous. It emerges when the contradictions of the system become too overwhelming to conceal. For decades, many people have watched the erosion of real wages, the dismantling of public institutions, the destruction of social safety nets, and the transfer of wealth from the working class to the elite. When a system cannot solve the problems it produces, such as inequality, political polarization, climate crisis, or healthcare inaccessibility, it turns to distraction. And sometimes that distraction comes in the form of a powerful figure who promises to fix it all, yet behaves in ways increasingly unhinged from reality. That leader's unraveling then is not only personal, it is historical, it is systemic. It represents the endgame of a structure that is collapsing under its own contradictions. In capitalist societies, especially those shaped by neoliberal ideology, we often elevate individuals into the role of saviors, charismatic figures who are expected to single-handedly reverse economic decline, restore national pride, or bring prosperity back to ordinary people. This cult of personality serves a very specific economic function. It obscures the system and shifts focus to the individual. Instead of asking whether the economic model itself is failing, people are encouraged to blame or praise the person at the top. This is extremely useful for those who benefit from the system's imbalances, so long as attention is on a single leader. Their speeches, their health, their actions, their scandals. The underlying structure remains unexamined. But there comes a point when the illusion is no longer sustainable, when that individual begins to act in ways that are clearly irrational or disconnected from truth. Even the most loyal supporters are forced to confront a difficult question: can one person truly represent or solve the crisis of an entire system? The worship of personalities in capitalist democracies often becomes a substitute for collective action. People are taught to cheer, jeer, and emotionally invest in leaders as though watching a sports match, rather than understanding how policy is made, how wealth is distributed, or how power operates. The result is a kind of mass political theater where citizens become spectators instead of participants. This dynamic makes it even harder to recognize when the leader's behavior reflects deeper dysfunction, not just personal flaws. A society that turns leaders into celebrities is not equipped to handle their breakdowns rationally. It either mocks them, idolizes them, or explains away their failings. Rarely does it stop to analyze the systemic pressures that led to the failure. In this light, the public unraveling of a political figure should be used not as fodder for mockery or partisan glee, but as an educational opportunity. It allows citizens to ask what kind of system produces such leaders. What kind of economic conditions make people desperate enough to believe in them? And most importantly, how can society move from passive observation to informed, organized transformation? The focus must shift from personalities to structures, from spectacle to substance, from confusion to clarity. In today's media-driven society, a political theater often takes precedence over political substance. The rise and fall of individual figures become the main spectacle, absorbing public attention while systemic issues remain untouched and unexplored. This constant stream of sensationalism leads to widespread confusion, fatigue, and cynicism. People are bombarded with news of personal scandals, mental outbursts, and public feeds. But rarely are they provided with tools to understand why these events are happening or what larger structures they reflect. This is not accidental. It's a deliberate feature of how capitalist media and institutions function. Spectacle keeps people reactive, while true education makes them proactive. And it is that proactive mindset, built through deep education, that becomes the real force for social and economic transformation. Rather than asking citizens to critically think about systems, the dominant culture conditions them to fix it on individuals. If a leader behaves erratically, the media tells us to focus on that behavior, endlessly analyze it, mock it, idolize it, or fear it. But the behavior of any individual in power is often a direct result of the pressures, contradictions, and incentives of the system they operate within. The leader may seem unstable, but instability in a human being is often the product of instability in the environment around them. When we focus solely on the person, we miss the structure. And when we miss the structure, we become powerless to change it. Education in this context does not mean rote learning or memorizing facts. It means developing the ability to analyze systems, interpret historical patterns, and understand economic forces. It's about empowering individuals to think critically about wealth distribution, labor relations, the role of state institutions, and the power dynamics behind legislation. When people learn how policies are shaped by the interests of those who fund campaigns, when they learn how crises such as inflation or unemployment are tied to decisions made by corporations and governments, they stop falling for surface-level narratives. They stop believing that one person, no matter how charismatic or outrageous, can either destroy or save a nation. They begin to see that real change requires a collective understanding of economics, and that understanding gives rise to organized action. Political spectacle is addictive. It offers a constant stream of controversy, emotion, and reaction, but it never asks the viewer to do anything more than watch, react, and move on to the next story. Education, by contrast, is demanding. It requires time, patience, and effort, but the reward is clarity. Clarity about how the world functions and what role each of us can play in changing it. With education, a person moves from spectator to participant. They are no longer dazzled by headlines or frightened by political theater. They are grounded, informed, and prepared to act in their own interest and in the interest of their communities. A well-educated population is a powerful one, and that is precisely why deep economic education is so rare in mainstream culture. Those who benefit from inequality and confusion have little interest in encouraging the public to think systemically. They would rather people blame immigrants or one political party or one loud leader on a stage. Anything but the system itself. That's why so many political campaigns avoid real discussions of capitalism, corporate power, or the structure of our financial institutions. They know that once people begin to connect the dots, they will begin to demand not just reform, but transformation. Transformation is not driven by viral videos or trending topics. It is driven by knowledge, solidarity, and sustained effort. It begins with understanding the system as it is, and it leads to building a system that prioritizes people over profit. If we want a society that is just humane and democratic, we cannot rely on personalities to deliver it. We must educate ourselves and one another. We must build institutions, spaces, and platforms that teach people how power works, how money moves, and how decisions are made. Ultimately, education is not just a personal journey, it is a political act. It turns despair into determination and confusion into clarity. It teaches people not to fear collapse, but to understand it, and to use that understanding as the foundation for something better. A society built on education will not be fooled by spectacle. It will demand justice, accountability, and dignity for all.